Good luck.
Hello, CASW members. Welcome to the Power of Ceremony, Indigenous Contemplative Practices, Neurodecolonization, and Indigenous Mindfulness, hosted by the Canadian Association of Social Workers. We are so happy to have you join us today. Happy National Social Work Month. My name is Roshni Kurian, and I am the CASW Education and Communications Coordinator. I'm grateful to have the honor of welcoming you to our webinar today with Dr. Michael Yellowbird. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that CASW is situated on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nations have been stewards of Turtle Island since time immemorial. We also remember those who were forced to come here, particularly those brought here because of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. Canada was built on stolen land and labor from Black, Indigenous, and racialized peoples. We recognize our complicity in settler colonial violence, and we honor our commitments to truth and repairing relationships. CASW is committed to engaging in training and education on reconciliation and decolonization, establishing meaningful partnerships with Black and Indigenous colleagues and organizations, implementing the calls to action and justice, and seeking reparations for peoples of African descent. We welcome you to take a moment to reflect on the territory you are tuning in from and the many nations and peoples who have cared for this land. Please let us know in the chat where you are joining us from. Today, Dr. Michael Yellowbird will discuss colonization, decolonization, and neurodecolonization, and their role in Indigenous peoples' health. Before we begin, I will quickly go through some housekeeping formalities. Today's event will last approximately 90 minutes. All of the widgets on the screen, including our videos and the slide presentation, are adjustable in size and movable to suit your needs. Simply go to the corners of the widget box to make it bigger or smaller. I encourage you to type in your comments in the group chat at any time, and we will try to address them throughout the presentation. Please use the widget called Q&A if you would like to submit questions or comments anonymously. A continuing education certificate will be emailed to you at the end of the presentation. The recording of this webinar will be available after the event in your emails or on the CASW website under the Continuing Education tab. Lastly, audience members have a chance to win a Social Work is Essential swag pack in honor of National Social Work Month. To enter, be sure to fill in the survey at the end of the presentation with your email address and full mailing address. This will only be used to contact you and to mail your prize if you win. The survey will appear at the end of the session and can be accessed at any time from the left side menu buttons. With that said, I will now introduce Dr. Michael Yellowbird. Dr. Michael Yellowbird is Dean and Professor of the Faculty of Social Work at University of Manitoba. He is an enrolled member of the MHA Nation, Madan, Hidatsa, and Irika in North Dakota, USA. He has held faculty and administrative appointments at the University of British Columbia, University of Kansas, Arizona State University, Humboldt State University, and North Dakota State University. His research focuses on the effects of colonization and methods of decolonization, ancestral health, intermittent fasting, Indigenous mindfulness, neurodecolonization, mindful decolonization, and the cultural significance of res dogs. He is the founder, director, and principal investigator of the Center for Mindful Decolonization and Reconciliation at the University of Manitoba. He serves as a consultant, trainer, and senior advisor to several BIPOC mindfulness groups and organizations who are seeking to incorporate mindfulness practices, philosophies, and activities to indigenize and decolonize Western mindfulness approaches in order to address systemic racism and engage in structural change. He is the author of numerous scholarly articles, book chapters, research reports, and the co-editor of 4 books: For Indigenous Eyes Only, The Decolonization Handbook; For Indigenous Minds Only, A Decolonization Handbook; Indigenous Social Work Around the World, Towards Culturally Relevant Education and Practice; and Decolonizing Social Work. Choice magazine selected Decolonizing Social Work as a 2014 Choice Outstanding Academic title. choice outstanding titles are given extraordinary recognition by the academic community and are designated to be the best of the best. He is the co-author of 2 recent books, Akira Ethnobotany and Decolonizing Holistic Pathways Towards Integrative Healing in Social Work. Thank you, Dr. Michael Yellowbird, for joining us. Over to you.
Oh, thank you. I guess I'll just go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for that nice introduction. I really appreciate it. Just to kind of prep you, audience, this slideshow that I have is one that I used in a class, and I have another slide show that I was going to send that would be more related to the title. So most of the material is in there anyway, but I'll kind of move back and forth talking about that. So that's why it says Professor Khan's class. So I apologize for that. I sent the wrong one this morning, but it's very close. So just starting with the very first thing that I want to acknowledge is I'm on Treaty 1 territory here in Manitoba, and it's the land of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, Ojibwe, the Dene people, and the Dakota people, as well as the Métis have homelands here too as well. So I'm fortunate to be here. I'm an Indigenous person from the United States, but back in the day, there really was no United States or Canada. There was just a movement across Turtle Island, and we had relatives and interactions throughout Turtle Island. So we live in a very different world, today, with where the lines of demarcation separate these nation states. So really glad to be here this morning, and I want to talk a little bit about the power of ceremony and decolonization and mindfulness and wellness and that sort of thing. So the first slide here is my oldest daughter. Actually, she just turned 16. She was probably about 12 in this picture. But contemplative practices are really important in terms of well-being for Indigenous people. And so I have 4 daughters and 4 sons, and all of them have done contemplative practices throughout their life. Some of the contemplative practices they do, of course, are mindfulness meditation practices. And some of the reasons that I find it so interesting and important to do is because we know from the research now, a lot of really good research is that getting into these states of contemplativeness, that we have these really dynamic changes that happen in the brain and the body, all the way down to the molecular and cellular levels. So that's pretty clear that we can see, how trauma and stress and uncertainty and isolation and those kinds of things, hate crimes can really affect us at the molecular level, all the way down to affecting our molecular markers that increase our vulnerability to diseases and disorders. And so one of the things I try to do in my work as social work is to kind of bring a more holistic view of the world, to understand, how our contemplative practices and mindfulness practice is important in social work practice. So as I said, this is my daughter. She is, of course, meditating. And of course, we know some really interesting things are going on with her brain and her body. So on the next slide, a term that I've coined is called neurodecolonization. And it's really decolonizing the mind. And subsequently, as the mind is decolonized, the body decolonizes, right? And so neurodecolonization is really about this, right? It's about the experiences and the perceptions that we have in terms of everyday life, of trauma, even of inherited, experiences that we may get from our ancestors, really change the way our brain is structured and functions. And that's, neuroscientists today call neuroplasticity, right? The brain's ability to change, when it's given new information or new experiences happen to it. Neurodecolonization is also about this. How does, in decolonizing our mind and our body, how is our environment important to that, right? Because our environment sometimes can trigger or silence our gene expression. We know that now from work in epigenetic research, that sometimes really calm, healthy clients can turn on good genes and keep them turned on. Environments that are filled with a lot of stress and challenges and racism and trauma and isolation and uncertainty can also switch on the genes that are problematic that can lead to disease or vulnerability and turn off the good genes. And that's really critical for us to remember. Neurodecolonization is about what happens to the brain then when we're undergoing these experiences. What kinds of neural networks are activated? What kinds of things are happening between the synapses and the neurotransmitters and the modulators? I'll talk a bit about that as I go along. And what changes are happening, in our brain waves. We have different kinds of brain waves, all the way from our alpha brain waves, or even gamma brain waves, I should say, all the way down to really low modulated brain waves, like theta and delta brain waves that are kind of deep sleep, real deep meditation, right? So what happens to those, right? What happens to specialized brain cells like our mirror neurons that are kind of related to our understanding and our emotional intelligence of seeing other people, right? If we as our ancestors did, observe one another, our facial expressions, my hand movements, my face, my eyes, my smile, my frown, whatever it is, mirror neurons in our brain pick that up, and of course it gives us that same kind of understanding of what a person may be going through. And then neurodecolonization is also really what's happening with our neurotransmitters that are sending information all through the brain, where the brain is talking to itself, and a prefrontal cortex, which is kind of the center of rational reasoning and planning and that kind of thing. And it may be sending messages to another part of our brain, the anterior cingulate cortex, which is maybe related to compassion. Maybe it's sending messages down to our amygdala, which is about fight, flight, and fear, those kinds of things. What happens when colonization or chronic stress happens, to that those transmitters and modulators that we have in our brain? And how does it? I'm really interested. I won't talk much about this today, though, about the diversity of the bacteria we have in our gut, because we know now through a lot of really good research that the health of our gut is very much related to our mental health, right? And if you take populations that have been living a particular kind of way and been eating particular kinds of foods and living off the land like Indigenous people do, and you take them and you throw them into a society where they don't have access to that fiber, those kinds of nutrients, that kind of food that comes from the land, then they're going to change. It's going to change the diversity of the gut biome, and that's going to lead to a lot of mental health issues and disorders. So that's what neurodecolonization is about. It's like, how do we decolonize our brain and our body enough to reach a state of good health? So neurodecolonization is also about this. What kinds of mind and body practices can we engage in that are going to decolonize and liberate us from the effects of colonization, like I was talking about? There's a lot of incongruency that exists today for all of us who live in the Western world. I mean, if you're not sleeping well, if you're stressed often, if you're looking at your cell phone, all the time, if you're not, sitting with a group of people several hours a day and having these conversations and this high quality time, those kinds of things are very damaging, to our mental and physical health, right? There's a lot of stuff that neurodecolonization, let me say this, neurodecolonization also draws from evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology, from traditional narratives of Indigenous people, along with neuroscience, exercise science, and a number of sciences that I'll talk about a little later. But it's what kinds of things are the damaging beliefs, the values, the memories, and so on that are impressed upon us, from a colonial kind of process and structures, right? And so the other part of the term is decolonization, right? Neuro, meaning the brain and the neurons, and the decolonization is what kinds of things do we have to do in order to engage in active resistance to change the forces of colonialism, and to switch off the subjugation and exploitation of our minds and bodies and lands. And the purpose of decolonization really is kind of to overturn the colonial structure and realize a liberation, Indigenous liberation I'm talking about now, but liberation, from these different kinds of things, these ways and thinking and beliefs and values and lifestyles that exist that, put all of us at risk, put the planet at risk. So neurodecolonization kind of also thinks about, in a much larger sense. In order for all this to happen, I say that, decolonization has to first occur in our minds and our brains. We can talk about it, a lot. We can write about it, whatever. But why decolonization is a very difficult thing to achieve is because we have not developed the neural networks and the structures in our brain to begin to take those thoughtful, compassionate, activist sort of stances that help, with our truth telling, that help us progress ahead, as societies and individual lives, right? So again, the brain, because of neuroplasticity, sometimes it takes many, many repeated exposures and practice to change a habit. It could be fear, it could be complacency or whatever in order to get engaged. I use a medicine wheel to kind of help describe how I put this all together and how it relates to, good community health and neurodecolonization and mindfulness and meditation, right? So as you look at this particular slide here, you see the neuroplasticity and the neurogenesis, which are related to the mind. So most medicine wheels, you're not going to see neuroplasticity or neurogenesis. You're going to just see the mind and how we should do good things for the mind. But what I've done is integrated Western science into Indigenous science, and the understanding that neuroplasticity, that our brain can change and does change when we introduce it to novel tasks and information and ideas, that sort of thing. And it changes for the better if those are positive ideas, they're optimistic ideas, they're hopeful ideas, or beliefs or practices or whatever it is. We grow the neural networks that support that kind of positivity. And that's not, new age, mumbo jumbo. That is hardcore neuroscience. We know now that our brains change according to how we think and act and feel and those kinds of things. So if we're feeling down most of the time, if we're feeling angry, we're feeling, a sense of hopelessness, the brain accommodates that kind of feeling, and it begins to raise our levels of cortisol in our body, which are the adrenaline-like chemicals that put us on the fight flight sort of ultra alert kind of state, and also raise things like norepinephrine and epinephrine, which again really raises our sense of like being alert all the time because of danger, that sort of thing, right? So that's kind of a bit about neuroplasticity. Neurogenesis is the idea of how do we grow more neurons in the brain. We know now from evolutionary science and biology and of course neuroscience now that when we engage in certain kinds of things, we can grow new brain cells at a higher, faster rate. And that's important because we want more neurogenesis and more neuron growth in our brain to protect us from stress, from dementias and Alzheimer's, all those different kinds of things. And there's a term in neuroscience called cognitive reserve. We all want to be building cognitive reserve all the time because of the stress that happens in our lives, the pollutions, that we engage in, whether they're from the water, whether they're from the air, or whether they're emotional pollutants, or whether they're pollutions, to our body, and any of those kinds of things. We want to be growing neurons just like we want to be growing muscle, or we want to be growing, a sense of conviction or whatever it is. So that's really plasticity, how the whole body can change if we engage in different kinds of activities, not just the brain. So that's the mind part. The body part, like I said, I won't talk too much about, but that's about the human microbiome, what I call the great new circle of life, understanding we have trillions of bacteria inside of our body that, if we eat well and we eat, a lot of plant-based foods, we eat a lot of fiber, those kinds of things that kind of crosses all cultures and all groups, is that, there's kind of a really important way, that we should be eating off the land and those kinds of things, less processed food and so on. I'm not going to talk much about that. I'll talk a little bit more about, some of the contemplative practices and how they relate to neurodecolonization and well-being, and how they relate to, I think, healing, And the last piece I'll talk about very briefly too is genetics and epigenetics and genetic inheritance, that I think we really have to take into account when we're doing social work practice, policy, and education. How much do we know about genetics, and how important is our understanding of genetics? Because genetics is not, it's not destiny. Our genes are not our destiny, but sometimes when in the epigenetic place, meaning our environment, how it influences us, if it can turn the switches off and on, that's really important to remember, right? Because it affects not only our emotions, but it affects our mind and our body, and it affects all the way down to the, as I mentioned before, the molecular level. I'll talk a bit about more of that as I go along. So these are just some pieces here that when we think about, the medicine wheel and how our culture and our experiences and perceptions shape our brain and our body's plasticity, and all the way to our neurotransmitters and neuromodulators, everything that we're doing is shaping those different kinds of things. And so when we want to engage in healthy things and healthy experiences and healthy perceptions of the world, hopeful perceptions, they shape our plasticity of our body all the way down to, as I said, the molecular level, to the microbiome level, to our genetic level, and so on. And my contention is this: if we're going to heal from the diseases of colonialism, it's so important for all of us to rediscover our ancestral knowledges and practices, right? And some of those things that I talk about in the work that I do, I'm not going to go over all those today, but again, traditional practices like movement, sleep, laughter, collectivism, all the way down to being outside, are traditional practices for human race, right? And very important. This slide here is generally kind of a really colorful slide, but I noticed that I do it on a Mac, and so this system is kind of takes away the color and stuff, whatever. Anyway, the important point about colonization, I'm sure that most of you have heard about it, is that there's this welcome intrusion. There's the place of contamination where colonization happens, where there's toxic and harmful contact and interactions between groups or viruses and human beings or whatever. There's this contamination period. And then finally, there's a period of infection where immune systems or communities get overwhelmed and sickness sets in. That's really not colonization yet. This is people surviving the first stages of the introduction of colonization. So the last part of where colonization really happens is when people can survive, all these different kinds of things, and they're no longer overwhelmed, but they can function. Right? And then they start to participate in the colonization patterns and structures that exist. And that means all of us right now are, at some level, are colonized. Decolonization then is something I've worked on for a long time. I've been writing about it, and publishing on it, and thinking about it, and for many, many years. But I came up with this model here about decolonization probably in about the mid 2005 or something like that. I came up with this and then published a couple of pieces and since then, but a lot more. But so decolonization is this, right? I treat it kind of like the medical model of decolonization, like you've been infected by a virus, right? And the virus could be a social or a political virus. So there's a cleansing period that has to happen in order to decolonize the mind and the body, all the way down to the molecular levels. And that's stripping away any of this harmful, invasive kinds of thoughts and information and values, and that's been imposed by colonizing structures, right? These different kinds of things that are hitting us all the time that say, guess what? You're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You're not the right color. You're not the right gender. You're not the right this, whatever. You don't fit this mold that exists out there, because colonization has an idea and understanding of what it means to be the right kind of person in society, to have these different kinds of features and these different kinds of beliefs and values and whatever. So it doesn't really, colonization really kind of attacks, that kind of diversity and that kind of spectrum of difference that exists, that's very healthy for society, that colonization tries to shut down, and move everyone to one center point. You have to be this way, speak this way, think this way, that sort of thing. So that's the cleansing period, and it's purifying from those kinds of things constantly happening, right? We do it every day, when we do mindfulness practices, or we do our positivity practices, or we do our brain training, or whatever it is, our body training. Then there's the period of renaissance and decolonization. The restoration the restoration of cultural practices, that ancestors did, and thinking and beliefs and values that were abandoned or taken away during the period of colonization, but they're still relevant, necessary for survival and well-being. So when the first slide you saw, my oldest daughter, meditating, that's one of those things I'm talking about, the restoration of contemplative practices and everything that we do, right? So contemplative practice can run a whole gamut. They can be just training the brain to focus, to develop our emotional intelligence, or to do different practices that increase the compassion in our anterior cingulate cortex in our brain, or prayer if you're a prayer person, or meditation, or doing affirmations, whatever it is, any kinds of practices, being outside more, eating differently, any of those kinds of things that our ancestors did that made them hardy and resilient people, right? The last piece then of decolonization is enlightenment, the big ideas, the big thinking, what is the big stuff that kind of is the context of why we're here, right? As human beings, we have to kind of figure out what our own life mission is, our own life vision is, and the steps to kind of move towards that. And understanding that intentionality of our lives is critical. Why are we doing what we do? What's our intention of doing what we do? And in neurodecolonization, it's like for the highest good of all sentient beings in the planet, right? It's for the highest good that we do things, right? So that there's we like Buddhism says, but it's also very, I think, among most people, reducing suffering and reducing confusion and reducing hate and oppression that exists. What are the big ideas that we can use, the technologies that we can do to advance, Indigenous people, I say here, but advance, social work, or to advance all, human race, so that we create a much more uniform and humanistic, or, well, I shouldn't say just humanistic, because that would be, but a place where we see, a much better balance in relationships between all the systems that exist, right? It goes beyond the, colonized, settler colonialism structures and processes, but gets to the land. It gets, even, further to the waters, to all beings that have sentience. So neurodecolonization is also about, as I said, the first part of the term is the neuro, about the neurons in the brain. The decolonization is about the activities that change colonization, right? Facilitate resistance, and intelligently, how do we dismantle, these really horrible parts of colonization? So in neurodecolonization, what I do is I use mindfulness approaches and contemplative approaches, and I bring those together with the present day sort of Western stuff and Eastern stuff, along with the traditional contemplative practices of Indigenous people. And like I was talking about earlier, that neuroplasticity, when we begin to engage in contemplative, optimistic practices, or, hopeful practices, or whatever it is we do, it really does then begin to kind of prune these troublesome neural networks in the brain that are negative, right? That are related to negative neurons firing, that are firing from the amygdala, right? And they're not firing from the anterior cingulate cortex, which is compassion and love and understanding and respect, or from that parietal lobe in the brain. And I'll show some slides of that, what's happening with the brain when we're kind of having this larger experience, right? So when I think about that, that's what neurodecolonization is about. When you look at this picture, then the work that I do with Indigenous people, then, because the brain, again, I've made it so fundamental in the work around neurodecolonization, is that the brain needs to be liberated from colonization. So in this case, as I talked about, renaissance in decolonization, what we have here are two figures here. One is singing to the brain sacred songs, and the other is smudging the brain and healing the brain. And as you can see there, there's little horses coming out from the brain, and these actually are the neurons that are firing. And as they fire, they are traveling back towards the teepees, or the lodges, or the traditional lifestyle, right? So the brain's liberated from the colonialism, and then goes back to who this brain, where this brain actually is from, this traditional culture. So trauma, of course, before we get into anything, we have to understand, the importance of what trauma is. And of course, what's really interesting, I think we've talked a lot about trauma and trauma-informed care, those kinds of things in social work. But it's really important to remember is that different cultures had their own methods to prevent trauma and their own interventions to mediate it when it happened. I'll give you an example here. I was just talking to a group, two groups the last few days, and we were talking about trauma, and I said, and interventions. I said, one of the things that I recall reading about some years ago was during the Rwandan genocide, and maybe you've heard of that, where there was this genocide that happened, and this conflict between the Hutus and the Tutsis in Rwanda, and there was a few million people killed. I mean, they were killed in the most brutal ways. They were hacked to death, with axes and hatchets. Very brutal, very brutal. So it really traumatized people, right? And how it all started, of course, was on the radio waves. Some of the people on the radio waves started to kind of raise the fear of one group against the other, saying they're going to get you, they're going to do this, they're going to do that to you. But these folks had existed as neighbors, had intermarried and so on. But yeah, they were two distinct groups, Tutsis and Hutu people. But in the end, this genocide happened, and many people were killed, and they witnessed all this really gory things, and of course trauma set in. The world heard about it. The world didn't intervene until way late, right, after all this damage was done. But the Western world sent over its social workers, its clinical, people, its counselors to help, which was a great thing, right? They got there, and of course they were using Western methods, right? They were talking to people, it was talk therapy, and they were trying to, get to the, trying to deal with people and their feelings, and trying to help them in that way. But it didn't really work for these people who were much more, cultural and very different than Western. In fact, when they were interviewed about that, how was the Western approach working with them? They said, oh, it didn't work well. They would take us, and they would take us to these rooms, and they would talk to us about what happened, and we'd feel terrible all over again, right? So it'd be re-traumatized them. And we'd sit in these rooms, for hours, and we'd have to recount those experiences, and we felt worse, and we never went outside, we never did anything. And so we had to finally, we sent them away because, they weren't using our approach. And so, the interviewer said, well, what was your approach? They said, our approach is being outside in the sunshine. That's the sun heals us. We have to be outside in the grass. We have to dance. When something tragic happens, we have to dance. We have to sing. We have to sing away this trauma, right? And we have to laugh, they didn't say laugh at death. That's kind of my interpretation, but we had to laugh at this, right? And we had to feast, and we had to come back to a sense of normality. But the Western, people didn't know that, so we had to send them away. So that was kind of very different when you think about interventions that cultures have to mediate trauma. And that's not something that we do that I know of in social work. We don't, when someone experiences trauma, we don't say, let's go out and do some traditional dancing and singing. Let's have a feast. Let's laugh, or whatever it is. And that all makes sense when I look at the neuroscience, because I don't know if I'll get to this in the presentation, but laughter is one of those things, and dancing is one of those things, and movement is one of those things that raises the levels of endocannabinoids in the brain. Endocannabinoids are these signaling factors that blunt the pain. They improve the mood. They protect the brain. They help the brain, protect its existing neurons from stress and these traumatic things that happen. And we know that when we run and we dance and we sing and we have these really profound experiences, very traditional experiences that are related to what I'm calling neurodecolonization, and we decolonize the body and the ways of healing, we know that when we do those kinds of very active things like laughter, as I said, singing, we know that it raises not only endocannabinoids in the brain, but it also increases what they call brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor in the brain, BDNF, helps protect the brain, protect the neurons. We know that from a lot of science, so that we know that when these Rwandans and Tutsis were talking about needing to dance and sing and move and be in the grass and be in the sunshine and feast and those kinds of things, that they were raising not only their endocannabinoids to blunt that pain, to make them feel better, to improve their mood and protect their brain, but they were also raising their levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is why these cultures did what they did for thousands and thousands and thousands of years before settler colonialism came in and banned those ways and impoverished them even more. So that's a bit about, I'm getting into some stuff I'll talk about later. But so trauma is also about, how in the United States and in Australia and Canada and other places where Indigenous children were taken from their parents. And this is really important to remember, because one of the things about that, I don't have a slide in here, but I'll just tell you real quickly. One of the things that there's such a powerful bond between mother and child. Remember, there's such a powerful bond between mother and child. And one of the things that we know now from research that's gone on and in science that's studied the brains of older women who've gotten dementia in their 70s and 80s and Alzheimer's and those kinds of things, when examinations and those autopsies were happening in the brain, of course, they found different kinds of material in there, and they found different kinds of proteins and different kinds of things that are in the brain. One of the things that they found, though, which was fascinating, was they found the living cells of some of the children in mom's brain, and mostly male, right? But both male and female, but a lot of males. So, and what they discovered is that those cells were still alive in mom's brain decades after the children had been born. And those cells were still having cell talk with mom's brain cells. And so people are speculating. The theory is that it's an evolutionary kind of survival mechanism where the baby's brain or the baby's cells migrate while the baby's in utero, right, in mom's pregnancy, and they migrate through into mom's body. They pass through where they are, and they pass into the bloodstream, and they make their way all over the body. Some make their way to the through the blood-brain barrier into mom's brain. So then these little cells, the baby cells, are, they're speculating, they're saying to mom, like, feed me, I'm hungry, feed me, I'm afraid, pick me up, or love me, I'm this, I'm that. And so this is why moms are always listening, for their babies, and they're very sensitive to that. But if you can imagine having your babies taken away, and babies' brain cells are still talking in mom's brain, feed me, love me, pick me up, I'm afraid. The torment that these Indigenous mothers must have been going through, when their babies were taken away, not only it broke their hearts, but it was breaking their brain in a sense, because they could not respond to baby's needs any longer. The baby was gone, right? So this is something that this research has kind of uncovered. The research has also uncovered that babies' cells that pass through into mom's body, some of the women in this particular study who had heart events, maybe a heart attack or heart failure, baby cells, they found the baby cells had migrated to mom's heart, and they had patched up mom's heart. Some of them were specialized cells from the baby that passed to mom that even started helping the heart beat, right? So if you think about that for a second, how close and intimate that relationship is when we think about trauma and the kinds of things that we've done to Indigenous people around the world by taking away their babies. That's trauma. The next part of trauma, then, of course, is those babies never make it home. And, not only, does mom worry about them and wonder about them, whatever happened to them, right? We know that, this is a picture in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. I'm on a board down in the States for the National Boarding School Healing Association. It's like the residential schools in Canada, and all the children that died at the residential schools in the United States. It's traumatic when you go there, and you look at these headstones, and some of them aren't even unmarked. They don't even know who these children are. And some of them, of course, they didn't even bury them, properly. They just, left them in the fields or somewhere in the woods or something like that. Very traumatic stuff. And there are this 20th century colonialism, where indigenous people lost traditional land. I mean, that's one of the things you'll notice about land acknowledgement. They'll say the land was stolen, the land was taken, whatever. But in none of the land acknowledgements do any of them say yet that we promise we will work to return the lands back to indigenous people that were stolen. Right? Land acknowledgements don't go that far, so that still has to be decolonized a bit more. Of those land acknowledgements and efforts need to be done. This has happened to people. These are folks from my reservation down in the United States, and they're having to sign away their traditional homelands. They were forced to do that, broken treaties, and lands were flooded. The one man you see with his hands on his face and breaking out into tears is one of my grandfathers. He was crying, saying that that we have to give up this land. You're breaking the treaties. We were honest with you. We did everything you asked, yet you still stole our land again. So it's very again very upsetting when people go back and visit those kinds of things. Now you'll say, well, that happened a long time ago. But what happens though is that intergenerationally through epigenetic processes, those genes that are passed down from generation to the generation, we know affect later populations. We know that from the studies that have happened, during World War II, under when the Poland was under Nazi occupation, and they were starved and they were beaten and abused, and all these horrible things happened to them for some years. And it wasn't even, like for hundreds of years, but it was for enough time that the intensity of that changed the genetic expression, and those genes that were passed down to the next successive generations of Polish Jews, we saw, those generations with significantly more health issues, depression, anxiety disorders, cancers, obesity, heart disease, all those kinds of things. So we know that as you look at this picture, it just stops, next year or it ends, but it's something, the heartbreak of all these different kinds of things then begin to affect us at these levels. This is colonization again, but this is the same, as I was talking about earlier. But colonization is also about things like this. It's about, colonization happens so some groups can really benefit and other groups have to lose really big, right? I go to say, and I always say it, that the biggest losers in the game of colonization have been indigenous people. Not only did they lose their land, they lost everything else, and their numbers dwindled down, and they were almost completely wiped out by diseases, by genocidal policies, removal from their lands, and those kinds of things. This particular picture is a picture that was painted by an American guy from the U.S., John Gast, in 1872, and it was really to kind of exhibit the manifest destiny, or what they call American progress, happening in the United States. And he was painted this for a travel log to kind of get people to move out west, right? All the Easterners move out west because they wanted to, God, providence, divine providence had said, this land should all be settled in the name of Christianity and Western values and so on. So if you look at this picture here, the first thing that comes to most people see is the woman in the middle, right? And her name is Columbia, right? And Columbia is the counterpart, or the female, counterpart to Columbus, who came and, killed all the Arawaks and started genocide, in the Caribbean islands. And then that spread, of course, to the mainland, Turtle Island, and all the way down to South America and all the Western Hemisphere, Hawaii, and all the, all the other places that have become U.S., colonies and so on. But if you look at, I'm not sure how big this picture is to you. I only see a small picture, but if you look closely, you'll see that Columbia has blonde hair, and she has a headband on. If you look closely, she has a star on her forehead, or on the headband, on her hair. That's called the Star of the Empire. So if you go to the United States, if you ever visit New York City, you'll see the Empire State Building, right? So it's empire building. So that's where, this all happened, as empire building was going on, right? And as she moves across, look at the clothing she's wearing. She's kind of like angelic, she's kind of got this really, white clothing. She's levitating, kind of like an angelic, um, being, I guess. And her skin, is very white. It's what in colonialism you would call this fair skin, right? If you ever heard that term, fair skin, right? Other skin, of course, what does that mean? Darker skin is unfair, right? I don't know, but she's carrying in her arm a book, and it's not the Bible. Most people think it's the Bible. It's a school book, and it's a very powerful book, because Bibles are optional, but for most people in Turtle Island and this part of the world, it's education, is compulsory. You have to send your kids to school unless you homeschool them at home, but then you still use school books, and those school books are part of the colonization, right? All the great things that white men did, and the white society did, and settler society did. So that's what Gass is painting here. Like the ideas are going out. The greatness of the nation is going out west. And as you look at it closely, you'll see at the very bottom on the left side, you'll see a bear, and that's a grizzly bear. Just above that, above the water, below the native people, you'll see a wolf running. Then you see the native people kind of looking back in fear. The bear is looking back in fear. The wolf is looking back in fear. And then above that, you'll see the buffalo, or the bison. Some people call them bison. And that's interesting, because these are all the apex predators, that existed in the West, that all the white people were scared of. They didn't want to go out west, So John Gass is saying we're chasing away all these apex predators. And of course, what we know in history, at least in the United States, is that Native people were almost completely wiped out. There were probably about 10 million people in the contiguous lower 48 states. And by the time 1790 rolled around, there were only 239,000 people left out of 10 million people in the contiguous, including Canada too as well. And the states are only at 239. So you think about that genocide that happened, right? A lot of it was disease, a lot of it was slavery. We don't talk about the enslavement of Indigenous people, right? I know that you mentioned that the enslavement of Black people, which was true, which was horrible, and we know that history, but most of us don't know about the enslavement of Indigenous people, which killed just as many, or close to as many as disease did. So what happened was that the grizzly bear was almost wiped out. The wolf was almost wiped out. The native people were almost wiped out. So were the buffalo. So you see that Columbia is in front of her is darkness. So that's all the things that exist in the darkness. That all these animals, right? And native people were considered to be animals, and she's chasing away the darkness. Behind her, it's all light, bringing the lightness. So that's another thing that I think that people have done, in terms of kind of holding that idea of white supremacy, right? Anyway, we see it also in the modern sort of context too. This is not 1872. This is if you watch Netflix, or you watch Hulu, or you watch any movies, or if you watch Amazon or whatever, you're going to see Colombia still there, still very much a part of colonizing culture. So what we know about all this now then is that with Indigenous people, there are all these lingering effects of colonialism. There's the intergenerational trauma and PTSD that still exists a lot at very high levels of disproportionality among Indigenous people. A lot of mood disorders, substance abuse, a lot of health disparities. When I say that, I'm not talking just about mood or disorders or substance abuse. I'm talking about people's physical health. Like all the diabetes that exists, all of the cancers, all the dementias and Alzheimer's that are climbing rapidly among Indigenous people. Suicide. It's very difficult, to not see the damage that suicide has done to youth. When I first came here to Treaty 1 territory from the States, one of the first things I experienced here, which I experienced in the States too, was there was a rash of suicides happening in northern Manitoba. I got on the plane and I flew up and I landed in God's Lake and met with tribal leaders and health providers and social workers and folks to talk about suicide and to talk about some of the things I'm talking about with you today, which kind of help, which makes people more vulnerable to things like suicide. Incarceration, wow, incarceration is big in the United States, but it's so obvious here in Canada. It is so obvious when you start looking at the incarcerated populations. This disproportionality is just like crazy, high. Hate crimes, so many hate crimes, especially against Indigenous women. I came here and I saw it in the United States, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, but here in our province, it wasn't. I hadn't seen anything like that until my first faculty position was at the University of British Columbia. I was an instructor there. I was finishing my PhD before I was get an appointment as a tenure track faculty member, and I was like, wow, the amount of hate crimes that were going on against Indigenous women in British Columbia. So here I come back many years later to Manitoba, and I'm like, wow, it just hasn't changed much. The hate crimes against Indigenous women and against Indigenous people. The mismatch comes from the term from evolutionary biology, where we're not matched for a particular culture because we've been doing things for thousands of years very differently. We've been eating differently. We've been being collectivists very differently. We've been hunter-gatherer, traditional farming for thousands of years before the last couple of hundred years, we've been moving across the land. Right? We can't do that anymore. You can't go across the border without having to show all your documents and so on. You can't hunt like you used to because animals are you can't have access to them anymore because of private property, and you can't drink the water out of the municipal water systems very well. If you're an Indigenous person, it probably has a higher effect on your human microbiome because of all the chemicals that are in the water, like chlorine and fluorides and all these other kinds of things, plus all the pollutants that are in water today. So these are all lingering effects that continue to disproportionately affect Indigenous people. So what does it do to us then? Well, it affects us what I call on these molecular levels, right? Cellular levels. This in particular is an enzymatic level. And the enzymatic level is what happens to the brain under chronic stress and colonization. So you see here is that there's a protein called kinase C that's in the brain that's released when there's a lot of stress and trauma. So colonialism has kept the stress and trauma higher for Indigenous people, I'm going to argue, but it keeps it high for a lot of people who are marginalized or are poor, who are targeted, by other people in society. But in particular, those groups of people, you're going to see the same kind of chemical flooding their brain that's going to be breaking down these little dendritic spines in the brain, in the prefrontal cortex of the brain. And those are important. We all have them. They're very, very important for our sensory experience, our learning, our memory, those kinds of things. When they get broken down, our memory suffers, our learning suffers. So think about children or people who have had long-term stress. And then you add on to that, existing so-called disorder like alcoholism or abuse, or smoking cigarettes or whatever it is. All these things are kind of higher among Indigenous populations. Then you're going to have a lot more damage to these dendritic spines that are very critical for your memory and your learning as you go through life. The more that they break down, the more vulnerable we are to dementias and Alzheimer's disease. Now, again, that's not just Native people. I'm saying any person that suffers from the stresses of colonialism and everyday stress, and trauma that goes on for a long time are affected at that level. It also affects us at these other molecular levels. Let me go to this one here. Telomeres. Well, let me go back to previous. We know that stress for depression can be sent down from mother to daughter. We know that, studies have gone on that show that not only is depression passed down, but genetic materials passed down. I know that for a fact because I've had my mother's DNA analyzed. I've had my own analyzed, and then I've looked at our markers and found some really interesting associations that I inherited some of the trauma that she went through just by looking at the same genes that show that trauma in the genes in terms of what they call telomeres, which is coming up next here. So telomeres are really critical for us because they are at the bottom of our chromosomes, and they're like the plastic on a shoelace, right? They keep the plastic on the shoelace keeps the shoelace from fraying and being fraying and then breaking down. Telomeres do the same thing from our chromosomes. Our chromosomes are critical, right, in terms of our well-being and our aging. We know that stress, chronic stress, shortens our telomeres, and it happens under different conditions. What we know now from different studies is that, of course, when middle-aged people are active, they feel better. They're around their friends, and they're moving around, and so on. They have longer telomeres, which shows that they're aging slower and they're aging in a healthy way, right? They're similar to people that are younger than they are. We know also that the power of stress and colonialism, and all I'm going to say is that if your telomere lengths are shortest, in this particular study for people who are both depressed and healthy participants, right, who are showing chronic stress. So you can be depressed, right, and you can have shortened telomeres, and you can be depressed and healthy, and like you're exercising every day. But if you're still like targeted in society, you're still having hate crimes committed against you, if you're still isolated and all those kinds of things, it still takes a toll on the telomere at the end. And in fact, when you're under that kind of stress, and it's long lasting, it disturbs the cortisol. Remember, I mentioned cortisol as the fight, flight, sort of fearing chemical that raises in your body, and you have a dysregulation that happens. And when you have that dysregulation, when you're talking about the families of missing and murdered Indigenous women, the families of someone who is, been injured, or someone who's incarcerated, or whatever it is impoverished, that cortisol levels are going to be higher when they think about that person, their loved one, and so on. So cortisol levels are going to go up, which is going to speed up the shortening of telomeres. We know that too with kids. And this is something we should really take note of as social workers. Wow, we haven't had this kind of information available to us because we don't normally bring in neuroscience or molecular science or telomere science or cellular science into social work. But we need to do that. We need to do that to understand what people are going through, not only psychologically and socially, but what's happening at those molecular levels. So in this particular case, we know that telomere length, is associated with a stressful or loving home, right? We know that certain neurotransmitters like norepinephrine and epinephrine, which are like, again, this super be alert kind of chemical, and your cortisol, fight or flight, can be activated. And we know that what it does is shorten telomeres even quicker, right? So we know this from this particular study, this has been, we know more about it now. This is an older study in 2007. But on the average, the kids that live in the most stressful environments have telomeres that are shorter than those kids that live in the most loving settings, right? So those kids that are getting ripped out of their homes and put into foster care, or those kids that are getting, punished, at school, or they're getting, they drop out of school, or they see their friends, commit suicide, or something's happening. Those telomeres are shortening. And what it means then in the big picture is that shortened telomeres for these kids, if they don't get that, if they don't regrow those, or they don't restore that, they're going to get the diseases of aging much quicker. They're going to get higher and quicker rates of anxiety and depression disorders, probability of more suicides, probability of more obesity, the probability of more cancers and heart disease at a younger age. So we know that early life stress, is there already. You add on to that colonialism, and you add on to that epigenetic history of passing that trauma down and that grief down, then we have the perfect storm happening. we know that telomere length, mothers can pass shorter telomeres on to their babies. That happened in my case. My mother passed on shorter telomeres to me. I know like I said, we did the research, and we had our DNA analyzed, and we sent it out to other providers and had it further analyzed, because I do research on this. And my mother was an overweight mother at the time she gave birth to me. It's probably just getting overweight, but she also had a lot of traumatic experiences in her life. And that's what Elizabeth Blackburn says. And Elizabeth Blackburn is not just someone who makes stuff up. She won the Nobel Prize, I believe, in 2015 for her work on telomeres, a Nobel Prize in science, right? She said that mothers exposed to life factors that shorten her telomeres can pass those on to baby. And what are those life factors? Life factors are hate crimes, murder and missing Indigenous women, sex trafficking, ridicule of Native women, the abuse of Native women, physical, emotional, spiritual abuse, and on and on and on, right? Poverty, those kinds of things. And even a mother or an Indigenous female that feels like she is not, what she needs to be as a woman, or she doesn't have the right features, she doesn't have this or that, and those kinds of things also pose, trauma and stress for her. When society says you have to look like this, be like this, or act like this, or whatever, if you can't make it to that level, all of us are going to experience that kind of trauma, or that kind of sadness, or that kind of frustration of not being that. But you add that on to all these other factors that are happening in an Indigenous woman's life, then you have, again, another perfect storm. Shorter telomeres at the end of the chromosomes, which again relates to a lot of these different kinds of issues. I mentioned brain-derived neurotrophic factor and what that was. And I'm going to go on to ask this one here, and go to decolonizing the mind. So some of the things that I talk about in my work that are so critical, that I wish we all did as part of our practice of social work, in terms of interventions. There's a lot of science on running, dancing, and singing. There's a really important science on sleep science. Laughter and humor is really important. I'm not going to show all the slides of that, because I don't have this time to show it today, but I'll talk a little bit about what those are as I go forward. Collectivism, being together with the people that you trust, and fasting. We don't talk about that in terms of social work. It's not in nutrition or fasting or those kinds of things, and how important it is in Western society today to get away from what it's called ad libitum eating all the time, especially for people like Indigenous people or other people that have particular kinds of genes, FTO genes, that people in genetic sciences jokingly call fatty genes. If you have those kinds of genes, one of the things about society is that a lot of people that have quote obesity are people that have those genes that have been passed down generationally, to help them beat the starvation that's coming around the corner, right? So we've maintained those. So it doesn't work in this society, right? Because we can eat all the time. Some people can eat a lot; they're not going to gain weight. But there's a lot of people that eat a lot, and they gain a lot of weight because the genetic expression is very different for them. These are the people that, if we had a famine tomorrow that started and lasted for the next 6 months, a lot of us would die off. Those people that can put on the weight fast and have the so-called obesity are the ones that are going to survive and pass their genes on. So it's different when we, a different way to look at that, right? And why fasting is important now, because of this uncontrolled kind of processed world we live in. Meditation, adaptive stress, and being outside. So I'll say this much about running. We evolved to run, and we evolved to move and to get our heart rates up. When we run, we know now, I don't have the slide, I'm sorry, I don't have the slide here, just to show you that it actually helps our brain function better. Our executive function of our brain, research has shown that it works better. Executive function of our brain is related to our ability to delay gratification, to hold our awareness, and to have cognitive flexibility. 3 things, right? And we're so much better when we can hold our awareness on something, right? And our brain's challenged now today because of all of the times we look at our cell phone. I don't know if maybe some of you are looking at it right now as you're listening, right? and our brains weren't meant to do that kind of thing, to do that kind of more than one kind of thing. We work best when we focus on one thing. So running really helps in our executive function, right? With that, it helps us delay gratification, right? I don't want this, I don't want that. It helps us, with our emotional regulation, and it also helps with cognitive flexibility, like to move from one cognitive task to the next without getting tripped up. That's important. Children learned that a long time ago in hunter-gatherer populations, and so their executive function was quite good. Children today, we put them on all kinds of drugs, all kinds of things, that for their ADHD and what have you. And that's kind of, to me, that's a crime against these children, that they're not running and dancing and singing enough. We know that running also raises endocannabinoids and brain-derived neurotrophic factor. One of the big things it does is it changes what's called kynurenine expression. Kynurenine is an enzyme in the body that's important, because when we sit too much and we don't move around enough, those levels of kynurenine in our body get toxic. They become poison in our body, and it leads to depression and anxiety disorders. So some of the research has shown that. Movement, on the other hand, helps to neutralize and to change the expression of that kynurenine in our body, so that we don't experience anxiety disorders or depression. And depression, by the way, a lot of neuroscientists or evolutionary scientists say that depression is a novel disease, right? We didn't have depression back then. We couldn't survive with depression. Sure, we got anxiety about this and that, but we had other systems built in to kind of alleviate the anxiety. But we never had the long-term kind of depression that exists, and that's clinical. So running and dancing does the same thing. Dancing raises endocannabinoids, protects the brain. It makes you feel better, lowers your blood pressure. And for people who are a lot of research is showing now that for people who have, if you want to prevent, if you have grandparents, or if you have a marker for dementia, or if you have parents that have a marker for dementia, dancing, learning how to dance and learning complex dance moves like the tango and other things can actually change and delay or either prevent those kinds of things happening to the brain, because it protects the brain. And I mentioned cognitive reserve earlier about growing new neurons. Dancing does that. You have to use complex steps. You have to dance in synchronicity. You have to be observing, feeling, all those different kinds of things. It actually does. And research shows that it does improve the brain in so many ways, protects the brain. Singing, very powerful. Same thing, raises endocannabinoids. It raises brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which increases neurons. Singing also, helps in terms of making a person feel better through the endocannabinoids and so on. Sleep. Let me go down to laughter and humor. Big stuff. Laughter and humor for some populations is critical, just like collectivism. Those two are related. For Indigenous people, you're going to find a professor by the name of Joan Chiao, who's worked on cultural neuroscience. She's a big name in cultural neuroscience. Joan Chiao. I think she's at the University of Chicago or Northwest University in the States. She's done a lot of research on this. She's actually identified genes for laughter and humor in certain populations. And most of the research now you'll see is that laughter and humor gets down to DNA. Some groups, that was a survival mechanism for them. It's also very socially prescribed, laughter and humor and teasing and those kinds of things. And those are more frequently found in collectivist groups like Indigenous people, less frequently found in individualistic groups like Western Europeans. But it's not that laughter and humor aren't part of Western Europeans. People have those genes too as well, but they will not. Their individualistic cultures are less sensitive to environmental conditions like laughter, so on. So let me go on down then to meditation and mindfulness. This is my second youngest daughter meditating. And so when I think about how important Indigenous mindfulness is and neurodecolonization is, I think, wow, this is something all social work, this is kind of where I come from, because I've been I've been practicing mindfulness meditation for 47 plus years. I'm certified and I've been teaching for a long time, but I know the importance of it and the power of it and how it changes the brain in so many different dynamic ways. So, like I said, I try to get all my sons and daughters to meditate. We know that mindfulness is not only being aware of the present moment, but mindfulness is recognizing our connectedness to the natural world that we live in and our genetic past of our ancestors. Like how, who are we in that sense, right? What kinds of things were passed down to us? What kind of knowledge was passed down to us? What kind of genes were passed down to us, right? And the mind is often colonized, by different kinds of things. And we inherit that, some of that mind, by, the past, but also by the things that are happening now. The thoughts we think, as I said earlier, the emotions, the beliefs that we have, and even the beliefs and the thoughts and emotions of our ancestors can make it down. It appears genetically, right? And so on. So mindfulness is really about, quality of state of our mind and practicing, focusing in a non-judgmental state, with awareness on our thoughts and emotions and so on, right? And it's done, meditation, of course, is done for this concentration to, whether it's on the visualization of the breath or movement that we do. But it's really done, to kind of promote relaxation and enhance our spiritual growth and those kinds of things. But it does a lot more than that, right? Let me go on to some of these here. What does it all do? So if you're working with people, let's say you're working with any group that are aging populations, which we all are, right? Or people that are like very, very me-centered, right? Or if they're struggling with, anxiety or depression, or if they're, have a lot of anxiety, or if they're struggling with addiction, we know that mindfulness meditation has a strong evidence base of working with all these populations, right? We know that in schools, I do some work with mindfulness schools and a lot of folks, and we know that mindfulness in schools improves attention, a better performance on objective tasks, and even on testing, right? Compassion, it raises the level of compassion of children, so they help each other out more. And we need a lot more of that, not only with children, but with everyone, right? It helps with emotional regulation with kids, adults, everybody really. And so that there's less reactivity, where we have a better ability to engage in tasks, even when our emotions are lit up. We can kind of step our way through those kinds of things. Just like I said, the executive function of the brain is working because then we're suspending that gratification we need for quiet at this moment. We're able to kind of get through that and move through that without emotionally overreacting and so on. Calming, of course. We know that some of the things that in mindfulness and how it's related to neurodecolonization is that there are these different neurobiological things that happen in the brain and systems that work. And when we do contemplative practices, which I talked about earlier when I talked about my model of decolonization, right? If we're doing the cleansing practices, that could be mindfulness practice, or we're having the renaissance of new practices or contemplative practices, or if we're doing practices that are about enlightenment, any of those kinds of things can begin to change our brain. And one of the first, ones that's, it's really been studied a lot is that these changes happen really quickly in our brain with contemplative practices. These are the things that help decolonize the brain from all of the noise and all of the things that are happening, that light up one part of our brain but don't kind of activate another part of our brain. So after this particular study says after only 11 hours of practice, right, 30-minute sessions, positive structural changes took place in the white matter of the brain. And that's critical because white matter in the brain is related to what they call the myelin sheath on the nerves that run throughout the brain. The myelin sheath is this fatty white, kind of covering on them that helps the brain send those messages very effortlessly and quickly to different parts of the brain, so that the brain is responding and reacting. So that if you see something that would be, fearful to you, and that would light up the back part of your brain, your amygdala, and your brain, white matter was compromised. So that message would take a longer time to get to your prefrontal cortex, where that would say, no, that's not a snake, that's just a stick. Or no, that's not a threat, that's just a prank, or whatever it is. Because then your executive function and your prefrontal cortex takes over, the rational and the planning and the understanding, that part of the brain, to think, oh no, that's not really what it is. What happens with people that have been traumatized and stressed, and of course, as I said, have all these different kinds of things happening to them, they are, the white matter is thinned out in the brain. It happens to people that have MS. It thins out that, when the body goes into this response where the body begins to attack itself, the body begins to kind of attack the white matter on the brain. And that's why you see people with MS that have the rigidity, and people with Parkinson's disease have the same kind of thing. We know more is better, right? In order to decolonize the mind, more practice you do, the better it becomes. And this is why a lot of indigenous cultures had lots of longer periods of contemplative sort of listening and thinking and eating and being out and, on the land or whatever, wherever they were, right? If you're someone that works with people and you want, these brain structure changes happening, all you do is look at the research and notice that if you're giving people 45 minutes of practice per day, and it's going to take a while longer for some people, but on the average, 45 minutes of practice per day, you're going to start to see major changes happening in structures that are related to the memory gets better, the sense of self, that homeostasis of who am I, the empathy gets better, and stress levels go down, right? It says the reduction in stress because there's decreased gray matter in the brain, and gray matter protects certain parts of the brain. So the gray matter can actually protect the amygdala, which is about fight, flight, fear, and so on. But if it gets thinned out, the fight and the flight and the fear begins to kind of get mediated. It's not as much activated, right? So we want that to happen. So another part of the brain is the insula. And the insula is a lot about conflict, but it's also about our introception, like our body, like our balance, and it's like our subjective state that we're in. Am I okay? Do I know what my feeling and I'm feeling, right? Are my feelings not betraying me? Is this what's really happening, right? And so it gets better and better when we practice contemplative practices like mindfulness. The insula also is really important to mediate conflict in one's life, right? And so if you look at the first bullet point, controls mental emotions, right? And regulates the body's sense of homeostasis and the sense of balance. Like, how do you feel today? Everybody says, well, I feel fine, but you may not be feeling fine. But when you really feel fine, you say, I feel good, I feel fine, right? And then the last thing it's related to is controlling negative emotions, critical, because we know that our fallback from our 400 million years of brain evolution, where we started, before we started getting a spine and a backbone, we had a reptilian brain, and what they call the triune brain, 400 million years. It took up until the last 17 million years for us to grow part in our brain that was related to compassion and love and caring, right? That's called the anterior cingulate cortex in the brain. So the insula, reminds us that, if you have trouble in your own life, if you have conflict in your own life, if the people you work with have that again, contemplative practices like mindfulness can really, really help activate the insula in the brain, which then again leads to emotional understanding of people's mental and emotional state, and as well as their negative emotions. Sorry, I'm thinking about the next slide already. So the TPJ, temporal parietal junction, also becomes activated when there's meditation happening. And this is more active in people that meditate a lot. And it's really it's associated with emotional intelligence, that you develop a greater sense of emotional intelligence and mental intelligence of being able to read other people, right? Critical. We should all be doing this as social workers to kind of understand people. We say that a lot in social work practice. You know, we start teaching people, put yourselves in the shoes of other people. Well, we can do that sort of, but and so on. So I see I have to take some questions. So let me stop here and take some questions.
Thank you, Dr. Yellowbird, for a fantastic presentation. I'm sure many of us can agree we can listen to you talk for hours and hours on this subject. You've enlightened us so much. I appreciate, for you coming on, and we have a lot of questions here from our audience members. And I'll start with. First, is there a reference for the article that you mentioned about the child's cells in the mother's brain?
Yeah, there is. I don't have it on this presentation, but I can send it to you. I'll send it to you. Yeah.
Okay, great. Next question. How can non-Indigenous peoples recover their ancestral knowledge to heal from colonization without appropriating other cultures, specifically Indigenous cultures?
So I think, some of these things that I'm talking about are fundamentally for all people. I mean, singing and dancing. Everyone's had singing and dancing in their culture. You know, everyone's had movement in their culture. So those are really, and everyone has had contemplative practices in their culture. What are the contemplative practices of your particular culture, right? A lot of people do yoga. It's not their culture, but that's something that comes from India, right? But people have taken that, colonized it, and they use it, and they kind of have all kinds of things doing it right now. So, but I'm sure that when you look at the history of humanity, people have figured out all different kinds of ways to stay healthy and have well-being. So it's in that sense, it's not necessary to kind of appropriate anyone else's culture, right? Unless someone teaches you, and some yogi teaches me yoga or something, I may learn it, but I'm not necessarily going to be a teacher or go out and say, I'm not going to go teach this to anybody. This is kind of my own personal learning, right? So I think that's really the important thing to remember. So.
Fantastic, thank you. Next question. One of the psychiatrists at the anxiety clinic in which I work states that environment has about less than 1% impact on mental health or gene expression, and that nature is about 60% of human mental health well-being. Environment maybe 40%. What is your position or response to that idea?
So tell me the numbers again, because the 1% was.
Actually, this question seems to give two numbers. So if Megan, if you can clarify in the chat, that would be helpful. But there's this idea that nature is about 60% of human mental health, and environment is maybe 40%. Do you have a position or a response
Yeah,
to
I
that
mean,
idea?
what's the difference? I mean, I don't see a difference between environment and being outside. I think and nature is outside. I mean, if you look at from an evolutionary point of view, nature is outside, right? Nature is environment. So that's what's really important to understand is that some cultures. What's really important to understand is some cultures are much closer to that than other cultures because of the evolution, right? 10,000, 12,000 years ago, some cultures started farming and they started domesticating animals and they became more sedentary. Their bones changed, their brains changed, their needs changed, their diets changed, their well-being changed, their purpose changed. It's very dynamic, right? So I think those two, certainly got that right. Those two are very important. For some people, being inside or being, or not being out in nature if they've come from genes that are a farming community, or if they're people that spend more time inside, it's going to be very different. Some cultures can do well with just a little bit of sunlight. Some need a lot of sunlight so they don't get vitamin D deficiencies and end up with anxiety disorder. So it's pretty dynamic. And the other thing about it is that there's been so much intermarriage between groups that it's hard to kind of really understand the full picture of that too as well. So I think the numbers are really important numbers to remember. But I always say one size doesn't fit all, because there are always outliers in those kinds of things that sometimes suffer or do better, whatever those circumstances are. But if you were to take a mean, I'd say, yeah, those numbers probably sound about right. So.
Next question. Is mindfulness a spiritual practice? Do you think it's important for social workers to develop spiritual competencies to decolonize their praxis?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it can be a spiritual practice. I mean, depending upon how you define spiritual, I mean, spiritual to me, it means meaning. Something has deep meaning, and it's a place I can go to recharge or renew. It's something that has meaning to me, in a sense, it's sacred. Not sacred like this is the end all be all, but something that I should take care of, like water, like the planet, like my child, like my love and my affection for my partner, or whatever it is that's sacred, right? So it's spiritual in that sense. Is it religious? Well, it could be. Does it? Because then you start to kind of go by, different kinds of protocols. Then when it starts to become religious, and then there becomes dogma behind it, that you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't think this, you can't think that, kind of thing. And then that becomes part of it. But I do think it's so important. I've spent some years, one of my really good friends and colleagues, Edward Kanda, down in the United States. Ed Kanda was one of the foremost people in social work and spirituality. Him and I were both professors at the University of Kansas, and I truly believe in the importance of spirituality and how meaningful things are. So I think that if we use, which I do sometimes, I must admit, be transparent. I use my mindfulness practice just to deal with the stress of everyday life, just to relax, right? Is that really mindfulness? Well, is it really meditation? Is it really contemplative? In some respects it is, right? But I think that piece is kind of it's the condition of living in a Western industrial society that is like, go, 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 get this done, get this done. And these are your rewards here. We'll give you a little bit of income to live on, and those kinds of things. So does it fill my soul? Absolutely not. Does it ravage my soul? Yes, it does. So spirituality, I think, is critical if we put it into the practice. And I think that in social work, we need to do that. We need to think things as spiritual, having meaning and importance, just like the beginning of that of the land acknowledgement, has some spirituality in it, and the importance of that land. So if we're going to read that, then as a spiritual kind of thing and not just an exercise, then we should certainly include some spirituality in our mindfulness practice. Westerners don't like to do that. They're kind of a little afraid of that, right? But when you come to Indigenous people and other cultures, it's all about spirituality. So.
Yeah, I think a really important part of learning to decolonize our profession is seeing things holistically, right? So
That's right.
definitely, yeah, spirituality is such an important part and a competency for us to further develop. There's
That's
a
right.
ton of questions here asking if you can give an example of a mindfulness activity that we can do as social workers, but also for Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people. There was a question also for, do you have mindful decolonization exercises for Indigenous people as well?
Yeah. So one exercise I think that would be a good mindful decolonization exercise would be exchanging breath with the land. If you could sit and you close your eyes and you get into a sitting position, and you can imagine, a tree or the land, is you're exchanging breath with that. Like you're sending life to the land, and the land is sending life back to you as you breathe. and just kind of hold that focus, like, what is that life coming in from the land? What am I giving back to that? And if you do that long enough and often enough, and the land starts to become a living, sentient being, one of the things that'll happen in your brain is that your parietal lobe, which is visual spatial reasoning, will kind of go offline. It takes a while to get there. And once it goes offline, the visual spatial reasoning will go away, and you'll no longer say, I'm this person here, and that's the land. You'll say, no, there's no longer a difference between that, because there's no space. That space will disappear, and and the land will come together, right? That's one way to decolonize, your distance from the land, right? And that's a really good decolonizing exercise. If you want to decolonize the distance you have between someone of a different culture and yourself, you may sit you may sit in a group with other people, and you may visualize exchanging breath with people who are different from you, giving life and compassion and love to each other and caring to each other, right? The brain will take over from there. The brain will give you the raise your levels of oxytocin. It'll raise your levels of dopamine for the reward that you're getting from that. It'll raise your levels of serotonin, like you're getting relaxed. The more and more you do it, the more and more you'll begin to formulate compassion for one another. If you get more people doing that with one another, settlers doing that with Indigenous people, you'll see the exchange of compassion happen after practice and practice and practice. So I believe it's kind of the thing that my work is kind of involved in, is what I call mindful decolonization and neurodecolonization. So mindfully, how can we begin to develop compassion and caring for ourselves? We have to give ourselves that love. We have to give ourselves that caring. We have to take a break on ourselves. We have to stop being so critical. We can't let that critic live in our brain. We have to let that critic kind of start to quiet down. We have to enliven the wise voice in our brain. That could be an ancestor, it could be grandmother, it could be who that is, that wise voice that says, don't be so hard on yourself. Be kind to yourself. Love yourself. Every time that comes up, that voice says, stop, be kind to yourself, right? People do that in mindfulness and other kinds of ways there. I forget the acronym they have for that, STOP or something like that. But in mindful decolonization, you're going beyond STOP. You're also inviting the wise, the wise supporter, the love, the person that is the wise voice. I guess that's the best way I can put it. So those are a couple of things I would recommend for social workers to do to kind of begin to increase their compassion, their level of love and caring for themselves and others. So
Fantastic. Thank you for that. We'll do two more questions and then wrap up the session. The next question is, can we reverse the effects of chronic stress and epigenetics?
absolutely. That's what I didn't get to. I apologize for that in my presentation, is that when we start to do those things, like when we start moving and exercising, getting our heart rates up, people say, well, what about the people that can't run? Whatever. I said, well, if they can ride a bike or they can swim. And they said, well, what if they can't do that? And I said, well, another thing, I was talking to some German social workers a while back, because they were talking about the bias there. I said, well, there's one thing that I found, that sometimes people sit in a sauna and you get your heart rate up, and that's good for the heart rate. The body reads the heart rate and the hemodynamic activity of the heart, sending out more blood to the brain. And it's dynamic. I can't get into the real deepness of it, but it does do certain things to little capillaries in the brain that help, preserve the brain, and the body gets all these readings that are going on. So it's movement, it's dance, it's singing, and those kinds of things that are really critical, to do, in order to kind of raise your level of well-being. So I think, everything that I've talked about, really has that promise to do that, and can change that genetic expression. And actually, one of the things I was talking about is that, and I didn't talk about, I apologize today, is that 100 hours of meditation practice, can start changing your brain in dynamic ways. 1,000 hours does some really dynamic things. Getting up to like 5,000 hours of practice, that's a lot of practice. But evidence now shows, there's a book called, let me get to this first before I remember the name of the book, but the book is Altered Traits. Altered Traits by Dan Goleman and John Kabat-Zinn. No, not John Kabat-Zinn. Dan Goleman is one of the guys, but Altered Traits. Richard Davidson is the other author. So look that up. But you'll find in there that the benefits of getting to 5,000 hours of practice, that's when you begin to see molecular changes happening in your telomeres. The telomeres start getting longer, right? You actually start reversing the damage of the chronic stress and the aging, right? And when you get to 10,000 hours, all these really dynamic things happen to brain waves and whatever. And when you get to like 5,000 hours or 1,000 hours, the me center in your brain starts to shut down. It's not about me. When you get to 5,000 hours, it's like, wow, it's about us. It's about us. It's not just about me and the way I think and my beliefs, but it's about us. And so your brain, that part of the brain that's about the me center, actually begins to shrink down. And again, take a look at that book, take a look at their science and research, shows that that's how powerful contemplative practices are.
Wow. 5,000 hours of meditation can truly change your life then. Wow.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely, in dynamic ways.
wow. Okay. Um, This is a very important question that, yeah, I'm hoping to hear some insight from as well, Dr. Yellowbird. So, with so many Indigenous peoples in Canadian cities who are suffering from intergenerational trauma, do you have any ideas how to engage our homeless brothers and sisters to help to heal? We have so many tent cities living so rough, and I know that many nonprofits are struggling to truly help.
Oh boy, that's a
Heavy
I
one, yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, to me, it's really a lot of it's really about compassion, right? And I mean, it's it's like I mean, I hate to say this, but I'm going to say it. What really made people change, you know, in the States was really because of a really awful thing that happened. That was the murder of George Floyd. It made people start to care. It was so awful to see that, him die and the way he died, calling for his mother and, I can't breathe and this horrible stuff. And for whatever reason, um, I don't know, I have a lot of faith in humanity, but sometimes it just seems that things like that, have to be really get to that point where, it's that kind of, you know, level of being drastic that people respond to. If it touches them personally, and it did because people could observe that, right? In the States, you see all these gun murders happening. There's slaughter of children happening. But people refuse to do anything about it. I would submit to you. I would never, of course, want this to happen. Never. But the way the brain works is it's such an emotional brain that if you showed, and again, I don't want to say this because I ever want it to happen, but if you showed people the carnage that like what happened to George Floyd, if you've seen children that happen to children, that would change people's. Right now it's all theory, it's all theoretical. They don't see it, they just hear about it, right? But if human beings see that kind of suffering, they change, right?
Mhm.
But that's horrible to have to go to that level. But maybe someone can challenge me and say that's not true. Dr. Yellowbird, people change this way and they make big change. But it didn't happen until George Floyd, was murdered. And did they start tearing down these icons of colonialism and slavery in the States? They started changing names. They started doing, they start taking a look at the police and changing these kinds of things, right? And but that's one thing, right? Is to kind of really get people to care. Sometimes theater does it, sometimes creativity does it in different kinds of ways. But it's really sometimes people go out there and they spend time with the homeless or the marginalized, and it makes a difference. But you have to get a lot of eyes on it a lot of, on it before you start to see, big shifts in response. One person can say it like, oh, this is horrible, but most people are going to shout them down or ignore them. So you need a critical mass. So
Yeah, I think for issues like that, um, many people are very desensitized to what they're seeing, right? To trauma, to violence, including social workers who, we deal with that on a regular basis. So we may be desensitized to what we're seeing. But from what I learned from your presentation is actually doing these mindful techniques and practices can actually like raise our awareness and compassion, right?
right,
And make us less desensitized and actually respond with in a humane way to
right,
these crises. And that's what we can encourage our clients to do as well.
right. And you've seen from the slides that I have about the insula, the temporal parietal junction, or the different parts of the brain. Actually, when we enter into these states, and like I said, I think every social work program, every social work faculty we should have a contemplative pedagogy. We should have a contemplative pedagogy that goes along to help us be better thinkers, more compassionate thinkers, more flexible thinkers, more resilient thinkers, rather than just getting, I'll say this because I was a professor for many years. Sometimes we just kind of beat people down with information, and they have to absorb it, and then they get tested on it. It's kind of brutal. It's not a really good learning. It's a very colonized way of learning. We should change that. And it's very important to kind of think about that. But yeah, the brain, when we do those kinds of practices, we have documented evidence and brain imaging that shows this happens, that there's an association of people's emotional and psychological and behavioral changes that happen in synchronistically with that. So
Okay. And just one last question, just because there's a few comments here asking for the same question. Where did you learn your mindfulness practices? What do you have any teachers, resources, or sources to share or to recommend to our audience members today?
yeah, so I'll tell you real quickly. My lineage goes way back to my culture. My teachers go way back, and I've had great grandfathers that were contemplatives in my culture that got down to me, about contemplative practices and silence and the importance of awareness and the importance of compassion in relationship to relationality and all those kinds of things. Go way back. The first time I started learning outside of that, besides Indigenous ceremony and contemplative environments, was when I was an undergraduate, way back when in the 70s, when I started learning how to meditate when I was an undergraduate. So my first teacher there was a book, and a guy by the name of Lawrence LeShan, who wrote about this book. And so I started learning. And then after that, I started running into people. I lived in the Midwest in the States. Start running into people way back then. There weren't many teachers, out there. So I would run into people every now and then. We're teaching TM, transcendental meditation, and teaching meditation. So I kind of sit with folks. And then as I went along, I kept my practice going. It wasn't until I did my PhD that I started to really meet more teachers, and I started reading John Kabat-Zinn's work and other people's work, and people were really doing a lot of research in that area. By then, I had been practicing a long time, and I was already teaching by then. So I went along, and people respected me as a teacher, and I had all this experience. And then I finally went, and I would recommend this to everyone. I went and people asked me to certify with them, and I just didn't do it. So finally, I did over the last few years. I worked a person I'd been working with for a while from the Prison Dharma Network, named Fleet Maull. FLEETMAULL, Fleet Maull, and his work goes with working with very vulnerable populations like prison populations. So that's why they call it the Prison Dharma Network. So I trained with him, and I didn't train with anyone else because everyone else didn't really seem to fit, the work I'd been doing all those years. So I got my certification through him, and my international certification, through a world organization. But I really liked, what he was doing, and what their program does, because it's very diverse. They bring in a lot of diversity into the program, but they teach you to work, with compassion with groups that are really challenged, like, people that, ended up incarcerated, that had really challenging lives. So they really do a lot of work. So it's Fleet Mall and the Prison Dharma Network. So who I would recommend. I've also got some Brown University. I've got colleagues over at Brown University, the Brown University Center for Mindfulness. I'm on their board over there. I'm on other boards, but they are people that are really looking at trying to train people for free. They have, they're an Ivy League school over there, Brown University, but they're trying to reach into these communities of color and train people how to do MBSR, which is mindfully based stress reduction. And they're trying to indigenize and decolonize some of their practices. So I'm one of their senior advisors. I've been working with them for a while. But if you're interested, contact Brown University and contact them about their programs. And you can use my name. Just mention my name, that we heard Professor Yellowbird do this presentation, and he said I should check in with you because they've got the huge philanthropic donor sort of thing going on down there, and they're doing good work. They're very, very good people. So I'll give you that much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Yellowbird, for joining us here today and for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom. I learned so much today from this session, and we've received many, many messages of thanks and gratitude from the public. So we definitely know that we have to bring you back for part 2. Again, for our audience, the recording will be uploaded to the CASW website, or you can use the link in your email, which will be sent shortly. Feel free to send us your questions and suggestions for improvement or feedback using the survey. And please fill out the survey with your email and your mailing address for your chance to win Social Work is Essential swag pack, which includes a fanny pack, pens, balloons, and more. Again, happy National Social Work Month, and a big thanks again to our guest and audience for your questions and your attention. See you next time, everyone. Have a great afternoon.